Hey everyone, welcome to our next live panel event here at Doc. Today we're exploring a topic that we've got some really excellent guests to take us through. So the main topic we'll be looking at is why ID companies are adopting verifiable and biometric-bound credentials. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we'll dig into the details of really what that means. We've got guest Paul Kenny from Daon, and we have Pedro Torres from Uverse. And of course, my name is Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO here at Doc. I'll let the guests introduce themselves in a couple of minutes. They'll do a far better job than I would do. But just to outline the usual structure for people that are revisiting or kind of coming back to hear us again, we'll run through a session. It's entirely Q&A this time. So I'll be posing a number of questions and thoughts for Paul and for Pedro to answer. And then at the end of that, we'll be opening up for audience Q&A somewhere around kind of 40 minutes or so. So if you are listening, thank you very much for joining us. It'd be great if you could post into Riverside just letting us know where you're listening from, so we know there's actually people out there who are alive and listening to us. It always gives us a bit of incentive to actually make sense. But also if you could put your questions in there, maybe questions that occur to you that you want to know at the start, or even as we go through the discussion that trigger some thoughts in your head, and we'll do our very best to get through everything at the end. So I think that's everything we need to get going to get started. If you what we will do as well is, obviously don't need to take too many notes from this session. We will be sending out the recording a few days after. It just takes a little bit of time to get some permissions and some edits done, but normally we'd expect probably by some point next week to be sharing the on-demand video for you, so no need to take furious notes or anything like that. So hopefully that all makes sense. So I'm going to pass over first of all to Paul and then on to Pedro. If you would be kind enough to obviously let us know who you are and who you work for, and just a very kind of brief insight into yourself, and then we can get moving. So over to you first, please, Paul.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Kenny. I work at a company called Daon, who specialize in trust and identity. I'm VP of Customer Success for EMEA and APAC at Daon, also product owner of our Identity X platform. And yeah, I've been working about 20 years in identity and primarily working with customers. A little bit of working with our engineering team as well, but for the most part with customers.
Fantastic. Thank you. You're very welcome to be here. And Pedro, over to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Nick and Doc.io team, Francisco and you, and also for the kind invitation. We've been discussing identity for a long time and the advantages of this biometrics, decentralized biometrics in this scope, and it's very nice to be here. My name is Pedro. I've been working in the area of digital identity for over 10 years now. And before that, I was doing research in AI. But more recently, I founded Uverse together with my two great colleagues, Vitor and Miguel. And essentially, Uverse is and we are on a mission to free 8 billion people from bureaucracy while empowering them to own their data. So our main thing is to simplify processes and making sure that the data is owned by every user, every citizen. So in the end, we try to enable the users themselves to safeguard the privacy, but have a streamlined experience. And for businesses, it's about accelerating how they onboard their users, but making sure compliance and data breaches, compliance is there and data breaches are not there. Let's say it like that. So super excited to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And they're really, really worthy objectives from a company, Pedro. So thanks for getting into that for us. Moving into the topic itself, or at least starting to skirt around it a little bit. You're both kind of leaders in companies working in the biometrics and identity spaces. Verifiable credentials have probably been around as a kind of thought since 2016, 2017. When did they first come onto your radar, Paul?
Yeah, I suppose always felt that digital ID was a problem there to be solved for us, and it's interesting just watching the different forms it's taken on. Like I remember the really early days of Microsoft Passport through to all sorts of things in between. And yeah, I suppose self-sovereign frameworks started to look really interesting, and seeing the VCs evolve out of that, I think has struck that sort of happy medium between sort of being standards based, yet solving the problem in an explainable manner to users, and that and end customers, and something that they can relate to and understand. So I feel like it's really mapping onto that mapping onto the physical world is helping people to understand it. So I feel like we're finally getting to something that's sort of bridging that gap between something that us in the identity space can get versus the people that are going to be actually using the technology.
Excellent, thanks for that, Paul. And what about you, Pedro? When did you When did you first become familiar with verifiable credentials?
Yeah, that's actually interesting story, because we were not particularly looking for that. I mean, we're trying to solve challenges in biometrics. So basically solving the problem, that how can I prove to you I've got exactly the same face as the person you saw before, but you don't know what my face looks like, which is simply put seems impossible. But that's how we came up with this distributed biometrics idea, where I can protect the privacy of my biometrics while making the proof that's needed. But then we started to look into, okay, we should do this for the whole identity. We had worked in the space of identity before, like governmental identity. So how can we do something similar, where I don't give you the scan of my passport, or I don't give you the full thing. I control it. It's on my hands, in my hands. And what I discovered was very interesting was that there was a whole world already there. That those dates you said, a bit after that. So they were already for a few years there, and I was quite surprised because there's a very interesting solution, the verifiable credentials that are there. So self-sovereign identity, as Paul was saying. But very surprisingly, this was very, very, very surprising. The technology seemed perfect. It seemed like this is great. And then you think, why is this there for 4 years and it's not yet everyone using it? Why? What's happening here? So I think that was about maybe 2020 or 2021, 2020. I think that we started looking into this and how can we use them as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like great timing, because it's never great to be the absolute trailblazer, is it, Pedro, where you're literally breaking down every barrier. So you guys coming along a few years later when at least some of the journey's been made is probably pretty good timing, and you're still nice and early into the marketplace. So
that's a good point, Nick. I think hopping on, every single time you think there's this problem is solved, you'd be out of business so many times. But I do feel VCs has that momentum behind it, where this is the one that we're going to see everyone come together on.
Yeah, I damn well hope
so. Sorry to interrupt there, Nick, but also it's too early is not good, but too late is not good. And I think actually that's why I think you were hinting at, Paul, is that in 4 years, it's going to be too late. I mean, lots of things are happening now, and we probably will talk about those, but the wallet from the European Union, etc. Some momentum is being now in the right moment for this to be the right moment, right? Absolutely.
And it leads nicely into the next question. And Paul, picking back up on, well, I guess what we're all talking about there, where my question's really around the kind of VC landscape, verifiable credential landscape, and the particular pain points that it's solving now. But I know, like, in line with what we're saying there, that discovery is happening, but it's still relatively early. It's not like there's massive scale in many projects just now. But Paul, what are you seeing at Dale? And obviously we've started to work with you a little bit. What are the kind of particular pain points that either you're seeing VCs being able to solve, or you anticipate VCs being able to solve in the very near future?
Yeah, well, I suppose the one that we're hearing a lot of noise about at the moment is certainly reusable ID and providing a path towards to that. And it certainly means, I think, some of the benefits of that and some of the pain points it solves are like potentially reducing or potentially eliminating the use of physical documents in remote identity journeys, which, are terrible from a security standpoint, and really bad user experience as well, very high friction. So I think that's certainly a pain point that I see VCs being an enabler to resolve. But for me, I'm not even sure that reusable ID is the killer app for VCs. I think it goes well beyond identity, and being able to actually link data and attributes to that identity is for me where I think the killer app for this could be. And as you see more and more, I would say, privacy preserving legislation coming into place with how people share data, putting the user in control of that data, letting them be able to share it and be able to associate it with a trusted identity, to me that's very powerful, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what we can do with it.
Yes, a lot around consent as well there, would you say, Paul? Like where the individual's like in control, but they're actually potentially sharing information with either lots of departments within the same organization, but they're able to consent at every step as to who's able to who they're giving this information to.
Exactly. Know who they're sharing it with, for what purpose, for how long, and what they want to share. Maybe not everything.
Yeah. And Pedro, on your journey as you've been going through this stuff, what are we asked this actually on a previous panel, and it was really interesting, but are you seeing lots of kind of misconceptions come through and misunderstandings about verifiable credentials? That there's maybe stuff that you see in the press or that you maybe see some of your customers repeating, but what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions around decentralized identity and specifically verifiable credentials?
Yeah, I think this is a big topic. Physical documents are perfect. The only thing they have bad about them is that they're physical. But the concept of the physical document, imagine there was no internet. It's exactly what you want. You want to have something which is signed somehow and you can check it, and that proves something to the other person. And digital verifiable credentials are exactly the digital version of that. It's just something I can prove to you that's been signed by the right person and has information there, but now can be used online, whereas physical documents can't. But in the middle, so there were physical documents, now there are these digital credentials, but in the middle, which is where we are now, and sometimes only in the physical ones, is this centralized identity. And what I think many people may not be completely looking at this in this way is that the centralized identities pose a very dangerous privacy issue, because if I open a bank account with some of those central identities, and there's somewhere in the government or in a private company, every time I use it, there's some footprint that I'm leaving of everything I'm doing, then we have a big problem. And I think, going back to your question, the misconceptions, I think, is on the one hand is maybe sometimes people mistake the two, decentralized verifiable credentials with these digital identities in general. They think it's the same. This is one misconception. The other one is when people just oversimplify it and think everything is a verifiable credential. For example, when I use my boarding pass and go on board the plane, I show a QR code. This is not a verifiable credential in the sense of SSI. And the point there is, just because it's something that I show you in a QR code, it doesn't have to be decentralized. So I think the words verifiable credentials, before it was self-sovereign identity, which is a name that even for non-natives, probably even more difficult, but it's even for natives, self-sovereign identity doesn't mean, it's very difficult to immediately know what it is. Whereas verifiable credential is like, it's verifiable and it's a credential. It seems like you understand everything, but it's actually a very specific definition. So I think one misconception is knowing what is centralized and what is decentralized, and that the verifiable credentials are actually decentralized. There's no central authority that can own the information there or that can prevent you from using it. And just to finalize, I think the other misconception is sometimes, which is maybe some people like us sometimes do, enthusiasts of this and understanding what decentralized means, we go to the other spectrum, the other side of the spectrum, and we feel, okay, everything, if everything is decentralized verifiable credentials, privacy is solved. And it's not, because we are still in an early stage where, I can now show you a verifiable credential, but if you read it, you have the data, and now you put it on your database, and I lost control over that. So there's still something to be done, maybe in the future, maybe after the UID wallet and all these MDLs come out and everyone is using this, that then another problem will come, which is, okay, I'm using my credentials, but then where is this data going to, and who is controlling that data that's in someone else's databases? So sometimes the other misconception is this is the utopic, perfect solution that will solve privacy, whereas there's still a lot to solve in the privacy aspects of using verifiable credentials.
Yeah, very good. The decentralized one's very interesting because even If you speak to some people, like, for example, you could have, I guess the way SSI was intended to be, where an issuer sends out a credential, the holder has it on their edge device in their wallet, and only that's the only copy that's stored. And that could be the notion of it being decentralized. But I've also spoken to other people where you're having a centralized storage for the credential. The user has the key on their device to be able to go into the cloud and access that, maybe through a web wallet. And the person I was speaking to was seeing that as decentralized because they were still sharing it from their edge device, but in fact it was like centrally held. So, and probably in another definition, it would be like a centralized solution. So, yeah, I've seen that one come up before, and I sometimes wonder if when we get into that stuff, that's where we lose the audience and the customers that we're trying to provide solutions for, because they just don't care. They just want a solution. But for us, it's an interesting debate to have. Sorry, Paul, you're going to come in there.
Yeah, no, I was going to agree with you there, and I think what you were saying there, Pedro, was that sort of where we get carried away with ourselves, and it's the problem. It's the solution for everything, And one of the ones that I see that in is actually in fraud prevention, where people think that it's the once everything's in a digital wallet, great fraud problem is solved, and we have a nice secure way for everyone to present their identity, and I just don't think that's going to be the case. I think IDV is made up of a number of layers, and presentation of credentials, whether they be physical or digital, is one of them, but it's not the only one. So it's there's definitely that a tendency that we have to think this is going to solve all problems, but it's definitely going to be a step forward. I think, despite that.
And I think there's some ways, like your second point, Pedro, which was a good one, where the notion that you can somehow share something and then not share it. And it's like, yeah, you've always got control. Of course, as soon as you share something, it's a way there's, they could screenshot it or whatever. Once you've shared it, it's gone. But I suppose things like there's, zero knowledge proofs can go part way toward, as long as the person that's requesting the information is not requesting everything needlessly, and they're actually requesting what they need. The individual could actually cherry pick the parts of the credential that they want to share using something like selective disclosures, and just share those unique elements. So they are still sharing data, but maybe they're able to minimize what's going across and being shared with the relying party or the verifier.
On that note of the privacy, slowly moving to better privacy. I think, don't misinterpret me there. I think, we are in a stage where hotels will ask me for my passport. They will scan it. They will put it on a piece of paper, and they will put it in a folder behind their desk. This happens in many hotels today. So the goal is to have a better situation than the current one. And for sure, verifiable credentials and digital wallets for digital identity, which are decentralized, it's 100 times better than what we currently have. I'm just saying that then there's also work when that's there. That's still a lot of work to keep going with the privacy protection. Yeah,
fair point. Absolutely. One of the reasons that I kind of go on quite a lot about why, we've all talked about adoption, maybe being a little bit slower than maybe what some of us intended, or being early to the market. What are your current thoughts about how do you see decentralized identity impacting existing revenue models of identity companies, incumbent companies that today you're used to verifying identities for individuals? Do you see a big impact from decentralized models that they're trying to wrestle with right now?
I suppose it depends on the company. So I would say, let's say you have a company that's solely focused on document-centric identity verification. I think that they need to be probably considering what their future revenue model is going to look like. However, I think for companies, like Dayon, for instance, who really look at identity as more of a broader scope than that, and certainly our concept of identity continuity, where we continually ensure that we have multiple methods to authenticate and verify people as we interact with them. I think I see this just as another tool in our tool chest to help provide good user journeys that can allow people to securely interact with companies that they work with. So I think it really depends on the company. So there certainly are going to be some companies, I think, where it will affect their revenue model negatively. Equally, there's others where it'll be a way for us to add more value to customers.
Excellent. Do you have a perspective on that, Pedro?
Yes, I agree with what you said, Paul. I think some companies, it's like, I mean, Jeff Bezos would say this about Amazon, that his mission is always the same. It's just no one wants their packages delivered more time and or not getting their packages. So what he's doing is always the same. The way he's doing it changes. And I think in identity, we're always everyone is doing the same thing. But if your focus is on specific areas like physical documents, for example, reading them and bringing them to become digital and all that, of course, this will disrupt. But I think whatever you're doing, unless you're doing very infrastructure things, including biometrics, for example, which is independently of which kind of identity you're using, really. If you're doing other stuff, this will be a major disruptor because, and could be bad. You just have to adapt. It will not impact negatively if you're able to adapt and not be Kodak with the digital pictures, right? So, for example, if your company is transactional model of, every KYC that's the model. Every KYC you charge, and then when that same person for another client will again do a KYC, you go and read the physical document again. This will be completely disrupted because KYC should be reusable. It's not just about verifiable credentials anymore. It's like it's not sustainable that every time I want to use something, I will use and go through a process of using a physical card and go through a process every time I want to do it. At some point, we'll just do it once and reuse it. And the problem or the difference between the current KYC companies that don't use verifiable credentials with the verifiable credentials ones is that the verifiable credentials ones are interoperable. So once you've done it one time, now this can be reused and it's part of the whole, it can be used by anyone. Whereas the other ones are very monolithic. So you do the KYC with them, even if it's reusable, it's just for them. And that's going to be disrupted for sure. This interoperability for reusability is a major disruptor, and it's why it's so good as well.
Yeah, I think it's also a benefit for security, minimizing the amount of times we try to digitize that physical document. Every time you do it, you have a security risk involved. Whereas I think that eliminating that actually helps security as well as convenience and efficiency.
Yeah, and I think as well, like when we speak to kind of lots of companies, I'm going to generalize, but you definitely see quite progressive companies that are using kind of virtual based identity specifically, and they are really looking to what's coming next and trying to figure out how they can integrate it and how they can monetize it and give better user experiences. But we also find there are some companies that are kind of doing that ostrich thing of just kind of thinking it will go away or it's not going to happen anytime soon. And I know that some of these dates that we have from the EU is saying September 2026, but I think if you wait until then to actually start figuring out your strategy, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I definitely see there's two camps with regards to how the appetite for engaging with this new technology. We talked a little bit there, or both of you guys mentioned about some of the user benefits with verifiable credentials. Pedro, you talked a lot about kind of CX or user experience improvements. And Paul, what would you see? You talked a little bit about security for users as well. Are there any other benefits that you guys would see around use of verifiable credentials?
So for me, it's definitely security is one of them. I would say the two other aspects that I would consider are the privacy preserving model. So being able to put myself in control of that data. I think Pedro made some good points about maybe not being in control of what happens afterwards, but at least being able to decide who you're comfortable and what you're comfortable sharing with people. I think that is probably, I would say, one of the bigger benefits of it, for sure.
Perfect. And Pedro, did you want to come in, or you? Yep.
No, just quickly, I mentioned, I think, the benefits for users and businesses, and they're around the same thing, the no friction, no bureaucracy, security, privacy stuff. But I think there's a bigger benefit, which it's difficult to predict at this moment. But it's, if you make this, if this ecosystem gets the necessary adoption, and I'm sure with government now, at least the standard will be much more used, and people will be using it every day in a bit of time. But I think there's this flourishing ecosystem of innovation that we haven't seen yet because the adoption is not there. So you won't the incentives for completely new apps to appear that use different credentials is not there yet. It's just something that will come up. So I think it's kind of the equivalent of, if this is the App Store, of course, the App Store is private and centralized, but forget about that. But if this platform, this technology is like the App Store, now what are the next 10K or 100K apps that are going to appear? And it's very difficult to predict or very difficult to say what those will be. But for sure, they will bring benefits, otherwise they won't be in the market. So those combinations of different credentials, for example, can I use let's say my document, for example, my citizen card, together with my driver's license to rent a car. Okay, now there's an app that very easily you join two credentials. But this is the simplest and obvious one. There's so many credentials that you can mix to get something out of a completely new app that would bring value, that I think a bit of the market is really new companies or new models that will bring an application that joins several credentials and uses selective disclosure between them, some of them, and does the right thing in a kind of automated way. So this streamlining of complex processes, not just proving who I am, but much complex process like opening a bank account, the whole thing, or getting a loan, or many other things, which have lots of steps and which in the end use lots of different credentials. For example, a credential could be how much money on average did I have in all my bank accounts for the last 3 years. This could be a credential that I immediately show to a bank, and they don't have to ask for a lot of stuff like they do now, of these statements in PDF that they have no clue if they were edited or not. See, so it's so much in the end that it's unpredictable in a good way.
Yeah, much more streamlined. On to the topic of biometric-bound credentials then. So at the moment, we have the notion where you have a verifiable credential that's typically tied to a wallet on a user's device. And something that we get asked a lot, and I'm sure you get asked, is what happens if you leave it on a train unlocked at that point and somebody is able to then basically become you because they have access to your wallet and the credentials in it. And so we start to get into some of the benefits around actually not only tying the credential to a wallet, but also having credentials that are actually bound to a biometric or a person. And that's kind of obviously one of the main topics that we want to get through today. And I know that both Dayon and Uverse are kind of really keen in exploring kind of biometric bound credentials. And I know it's a huge part of obviously what you're doing at Uverse, Pedro, as well. So maybe I can start with you, Pedro. What are the challenges that you see of biometric bound credentials, or what problems do they address in your view?
Yeah, so there's this big challenge, which does not depend on binding the biometrics itself to the credential, which is, the challenge we're solving is if I show my credential to someone, can they then use it after I show to them to pretend it's their credential? Or, as you said, if someone gets hold of my credential, can they actually use it? Which is similar, but actually I'm going to show my credentials to lots of people. So if there's ways for people to use them, it's also a problem. But if we focus on this last one, meaning if someone has the ability to use my credential, how is this? What are we trying to solve with the biometric stuff? So, as I said, verifiable credentials are just nothing more than a digital version of a card. And from the last 100 years, passports, identity cards, travel cards, so many of those actually have the picture right by its side because they are high value or they are so important that you need to make sure it's the right person using them. When you look at these verifiable credentials that they're being created for identity, etc., this is not the case, which is very, very worrying. I mean, if I generate this credential of an identity and there's no checking of the picture and that the person using it is the same, then we're not mimicking the physical ones and we're losing something in there. The usual way people go by that is saying, okay, but this is in a phone and the phone is protected. There's a PIN or there's some kind of security around it. And even if the unlocked phone on the train is kind of a far-fetched or not the big risk, I think there's so many more risks than that. I mean, just the fact that you use a PIN instead of a face to use a credential as important as signing a contract, something you can use your identity to sign a contract, very high value contract, open a bank account. Knowing a PIN by itself should not be the case. Many people will use their date of birth, or some colleagues will know, or whatever it is. So making sure it's not just accessing a wallet with a PIN, and this is now the challenge we are solving, not just a biometric from the phone, which has no relation to the biometric of the credential. So if I have your travel pass in my digital wallet, my Face ID from iPhone will say, yeah, this is Pedro. So as long as I'm able to put it there, there's no check that the access to the wallet has anything to do with the biometric check to the credential. And that's why we really believe that's the core of what we're doing now, is binding the biometric, the credentials with biometric to the credential itself. So in summary, and sorry for being so long on this, but I think native mobile biometrics is great to protect your wallet from attackers. So if I have my stuff there, it may be difficult for people to use it. They need to know my PIN, etc. But it actually does not prevent in any way that my credential is added to their wallet somehow. So this mechanism of checking at source when you add credentials also needs to be biometrically bound. It's both things. It's when you issue and put it in the wallet and when you verify. And many of these credentials have actually biometrics there. It's part of the credential. So just doing a check every time you actually use it with the proper face of the person with the face from the credential is so obvious that, in my opinion, it really has to be there.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the important part as well when we're talking about kind of biometrics on a phone. Obviously, it's just probably, in many cases, if that's being used to unlock, all it's proving is that you're the owner of the phone rather than
or an authorized user of the phone.
Yeah.
They're not bound to one set of biometrics. As you know, you can enroll multiples onto the phone. And I think the way I look at it is it goes back to that old meme, I guess, of how does the internet know you're a dog? Like that. Okay, I'm presenting this verifiable credential that we know has been issued by an authority and can prove that, and we can ensure that it's been presented from the wallet that it was issued to. Great. We then need to make an assumption about the security of that wallet. Some of that will be encoded in standards for various wallets, like in the EU, but some of it may not. So it gets us then down to deciding how we're going to trust that the presenter of that credential is the person that it's issued to. And like Pedro said, if the credential has a piece of biometric information in it, being able to verify that piece of biometrics as part of it is something we should do. And the way I look at it is, it might not necessarily be for every transaction. That could be risk-based. It may be, like the analogy I would use is, I could maybe give my daughter my debit card, and she might be able to go into the store and buy some candy, and they'll tap it on let her tap it on the reader, no problem, and out she'll walk with the candy. But if I send her into a liquor store with the same card and my driving license, I'm pretty sure the person on the store is not going to give her liquor, because they'll see that the photo on the driving license is different. And that's what it's about, is being able to use the data that's on the credential to make sure that the presenter is actually the person that it was issued to. And whether that's done as a instruction to the wallet as part of and a trusted wallet that's part of the presentation of the credential, or whether that's done as part of the present on the receiving side as part of the presentation, I think is something that we're just going to see. I think there's not going to be one solution fits all. If these constant debates and biometrics about server versus client and all these versus things, no one can ever agree one answer, and I suspect it's going to be the same here. We'll have some ecosystems where the wallet's going to be doing that, and we'll have some ecosystems where the relying party will be the ones that have to make the risk decision and decide whether to do it or not.
And is it worth mentioning here as well, for the kind of privacy advocates which may be on this or listening to this panel, just to clarify, we're not talking about putting actual biometrics inside the credential itself. And so just to clarify, Pedro, on that point, like we're talking about putting specific identifiers on the credential, not the actual biometric itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Very good point.
Yeah, just in case we get slated at the end for talking about privacy, then putting people's faces all over.
I actually think there will be some credentials that will have the biometric in it, Nick, but it'll be up to the person to decide if they're comfortable disclosing that information or not for someone to do it. And I think there's certainly, I'd love to get to a world where we're never having to do it, but I think there are going to be some entities who will feel that the onus of them to comply with the regulations means that they do need to do it. So unless they have a trust model where they have that trust in the wallet to actually do that for them. So it's going to be a mix, I think, when you look at it globally, and then I think each scheme will have its own one that they land on. Yeah.
Sometimes it's a shame when you hear stuff like that, and I think you're absolutely right. I think there will be certain cases where, a government or whatever, a company would actually require that. But I always think it's incumbent on us as builders of technology that you almost sometimes need to protect users a little bit from themselves, and they may not understand the implications of sharing that type of information. But as you say, it may well be a requirement that's placed on them.
You're 100% on the money there, Nick. And I think it's that sort of trying to protect users from themselves thing, I think, that make biometric-bound credentials so important, because we have to assume that wallets will get compromised, because users are, tricked into doing things all the time and we have to assume that they'll be tricked into compromising their wallet. And what else can we do to help protect their identity if that happens?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe I would just remember one thing, which is it's a good example of this. It's not a wallet or an identity wallet, but there's a kind of fraud that we were aware of, that it's like a banking app where you can use it to pay. And what people would do is they put an ad of something selling online, very cheap, very good. Everyone tries to buy it, and then they would say, okay, do you have this app to buy stuff? And this is like only in Portugal, just a specific country, but it's a way of paying that many people use, maybe half of the people, but the other half doesn't. So when someone who doesn't have that say, well, I don't have that way of paying, they say, it's not a problem. You can just install it now. And they go through a process with social engineering to getting that person to install that app on their phone, and then their biometrics on the phone gives them access because it's their phone, the attacker's phone, right? So the point being, imagine someone who doesn't have the wallets from the government, for example, the UDI wallet, and then you get into this process of people trying to get their wallet into the attacker's, the good people wallet in the attacker's phone. And then the biometrics of the phone doesn't mean anything there, because you can do whatever you want in your own phone, right? So I think this is a good example, and this is real. So this can happen, and this will happen for sure. Yeah. We have, like you said, things
Pedro,
like this will happen. We need to protect them.
Think about the audiences, Pedro, where that's most likely to happen. The people who are least digitally connected are probably the ones that are going to be the prime targets for that type of attack.
Yes.
In terms of industries where we see this, being used, Paul, you talked, I think, about age verification as one of the kind of use cases for biometrics as well. Pedro, you're absolutely in the weeds with this stuff. What kind of specific industries and sectors are you seeing the most traction in, or what's exciting you the most right now in terms of industries that you can serve most effectively?
So certainly the ones that we're seeing the most initial traction with is in age verification. That is where we're seeing things actually going live. Where I think the centralized model is one that it really shows its weaknesses, that industry, where people maybe, want to assert that they're over a certain age, but maybe don't want to have the entity know much more about them than that. And I think that's a really nice use case for it. But I'd certainly I'm looking forward to seeing more use cases being enabled in this space. I think the advent of MDLs is going to help a lot in terms of accelerating that and the availability of them from various governments. We can see some maybe a little bit more progressive than others on getting there, but certainly I think that's probably going to be part of the next wave here that certainly we're seeing in our pipeline anyway.
Awesome. What about you, Pedro?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of applications where it's not a specific application, but it's anywhere where the government identity has to be used. Again, I'm not sure if the question is about verifiable credentials. In general, the biometric-bound credentials specifically.
It is.
But for the biometric-bound. So, yeah, I think government identity is always, you always need to do biometric binding, and you always need to check it's the right person. There's some digital identities even in Europe where they issue it with a PIN, some username, maybe it's the phone, maybe it's some number, and then a PIN that you have, and you can use it. This is very risky because then all kinds of wrong things happen. Even some people allowing others that have a problem to use their own identity for something, which is even more difficult to track, and other stuff. So everything that's government will allow you to sign contracts, to open bank accounts, etc. All those, I think they need to be it. And I'm sure even the governments themselves will want to have that as soon as possible. The other ones, Paul mentioned this a bit earlier with the payment of the card. So anything that's in banking which is above certain threshold, this will depend on the companies and which banks want to do whichever business rules, but certain values, it also on the value. So if something is above some level of euros, pounds, it probably will have this additional check. This is what happens nowadays with banking apps. It also happens, they do a certain additional check. So if you're using something of a credential to do some transaction, for example, if I'm showing my proof of IBAN to someone to do something that has a high value behind it, then this probably will have to be biometrically bound. I think just to finish on that, I think the age that you mentioned, Paul, is a very good one. And I just remember, very recently in Australia, they've changed the rules for social networks. I think it's still an ongoing process, still 1 year for the changes to go. But basically, they need to make sure that anyone below 16 is not able to use social networks. So you're not going to put potentially 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds under some face scan to estimate their age. This doesn't make sense, at least to me. You will not ask for a passport with all the details or a proof of identity that is stored somewhere. So this is actually the best, I would say, the best use case for age verification that could really use of a zero knowledge proof of, I have the credential, I do it locally here and I prove it's mine, and now you have it. So you only have yes or no for entering that particular process.
Yeah, I also think it's one of the best use cases for that idea of a wallet check for the biometric bound credential, where the wallet can give an assertion that it is the correct person who the credential was issued to that's presenting it. It's one of the prime reasons we're checking for the age, as you said, is to enforce either safety or control, and you can ensure that some of the people that you're trying to ensure the safety of will be trying to get around those processes, so you have to assume there's going to be collusion there, and that you are able to actually assert that it is the person the credential was issued to that's presenting it.
I think it's very easy to imagine a credential of over 18 being sold. I mean, if the credential is just saying yes or no after it's analyzed, if I can just share that credential with someone, and that then some, it's like before it was older people going to buy alcohol for the youngers. Now it will be older people getting their credentials for others younger to be able to do stuff they can't. So that check is very important in those cases.
It's funny as you get older, I very much wish I could get ID'd when I go to buy beer or wine these days, but unfortunately it doesn't happen anymore. But anyway, I'll move on. But I'm just wondering as well, the other use case I thought might come up, but I just wonder if it's because the travel use case and seamless travel. One thing that you really see the US marching pretty hard on is the kind of at least border control, use of biometrics to board flights and kind of leave ports and things like that. But I don't think we're seeing that as much in Europe, and I don't know, maybe there's privacy notions around why that's happening. But is that something you'd agree with? Do you think that America are moving away from us, and do you think that's a good thing, or do you think that the EU are maybe more privacy centric and that's why they're moving more quickly?
I think it's an interesting dichotomy in the US, because on one hand, and I think it's possibly because of the lack of data and privacy regulation in the US, we've actually seen less adoption in the commercial world of server-based biometrics in the US. Yet travel is a use case where we're actually seeing centralized biometric systems, as you said, being used for quite a lot of use cases now. And, I think for those of us in the EU, we're thinking naturally that this would perfectly fit the decentralized model. But it is one of the interesting things that we're seeing travel do the opposite to every other industry in the US and really, really going in on centralized biometrics. I think the idea of having a decentralized model suits the travel use case very well. It possibly doesn't enable some of the, let's say, as they call it, naked biometric use cases, where basically I don't need a device with me and I'm using systems that are working off live feeds to identify me. Some people would argue that provides a better, smoother user experience than maybe presenting a phone or some sort of second factor that contains the credential as part of the journey. However, on the other hand, I think the privacy maybe trumps that little. I'd rather present the phone and not share my biometric data to a big database backend. That's my own personal take, but it's certainly an interesting use case, and interesting to see the difference of opinion in different regions on it.
Yeah, definitely. Do you see then with so kind of got like something that we're seeing, and I think the whole industry is seeing, is the MDLs, the mobile driver's licenses in the US has moved quite rapidly this year, certainly more quickly than I would have thought. Obviously, we have EIDAS stuff coming in 2026. Do you see an impact then of those government-backed credentials or ID forms coming in? Do you see a role for biometrics within those ecosystems?
I think it's exactly fits into the previous answers of anything that has to do with government identity will need to be biometrically bound. MDLs or the European wallet, they are one case of verifiable credentials for government. I don't see any other possibility for you to use an identity. That's why when they were physical, and they still are physical, but in the physical ones, you always have the picture right there because it's the first thing people do. If I imagine me opening a bank account or doing something with my passport, but my passport never has a picture, I just show it. There's some name there, some date of birth, and they just look at it and type it in. They wouldn't be trustworthy. You need to check that the passport has not been tampered with, that there's a picture, it matches the person. So I think clearly also the discussion that Paul was alluding at there before in privacy is relevant here. I think so US versus EU, for example. I think people nowadays, it's not like you have to take your phone from your bag and do a lot of work. Most people will be already like this as they are boarding because they're doing something on their phone. So using this as a factor where you have some information that needs to be checked to avoid the centralized naked verification as before, it's not a usability issue, I think. So in the end, I think everyone, even the US, everyone will migrate to this. Something's in my phone, but I still, depending on the case, may need to check that I'm the right user here. And maybe it's on my phone that I can check that directly, right? So I'm using the phone and the face on the phone to prove that's the credential. It's used for 3 seconds or 5 seconds. I put it there, tap it, whatever it is, and I can use it. It's how we do everything now these days. There's some biometric check on your phone and you do something. So I think this is both MDLs and UDI. They will all converge to this. And maybe just a quick comment on, there were a few pilots and even operational travel use cases where people would board with the face, no documents, etc. Some of them only have actually been stopped, or there were some issues with privacy and biometric being used in that particular because of the protection authorities in that country or something like that. And I think it's reasonable, and you will see more of that. Once you have these verifiable credentials that are local and that you can control, that's your biometric check should not go to be done somewhere else. It should be done locally or in a way that's privacy preserving. So no centralized databases of faces, but still the ability, as I said in the first beginning, to prove that's the face as before, but without you knowing my face, which is strange. It seems strange, but that's exactly what the modern biometrics should do. You're able to prove your face is the previous one or it matches a credential. No one knows what your face looked like. They just know it matches and it's correct.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great answer. Okay, so we're into the last 10 minutes or so we should move into some of the audience questions. So let me go to Usman. Usman is asking, how do you see the use of verifiable credentials for digital signing? So either one of you, if you have an opinion on that, please feel free to give it a rip.
I think as part of digital signing, we will need to ensure that, again, that the person the credential was issued to is present. And it's really important for signing. If I'm signing a contract for a large value loan or something like that, we need that to be part of the process. So I see it as being part of the process of digital signing will be to ensure that the actual signatory is present before the digital signature is applied. So I think if you look at a lot of the way digital signing works at the moment, it usually involves some sort of a non-verifiable credential, old school, document-centric IDV as part of that process. That will get dropped out, and I think we'll see a biometric, and I think it will have to be a biometric-bound credential, depending on what you're signing. But certainly for most things, I think where there's legal consequences, there will need to be some assertion that the actual person was present during that event.
Great. Are you seeing that, Pedro? Is that a use case that's interesting for you and your involvement in biometrics in terms of an individual signing documents or contracts or whatever?
So I totally agree with Paul. We are not in the value chain. We're not so downstream where the actual signing of documents will happen. So someone will use our technology to create different use cases, and that may be one of them. So for us, it's just at some point, someone will check that the face matches the one from a document, and that's where we come in. But I do believe that it's amazing these days how society can function, and it can function with people signing stuff only with their email, DocuSign email link. They sign something. It has full legal consequences, and sometimes lots of value involved in it. And it was done that because different countries, we cannot get together, let's just sign it, have its witnesses in the sense that there are some CCs and some emails exchanged, but reasonably, they're probably not legally binding in some cases. And it just happens because most people are good faith people, and you sign it and you honor the contracts. But when problems can really happen is on the fringe cases where that's not the case.
Very good. Okay, so Louise is the next question. She's asking, how do you see the threat of deep fakes interrupting this ecosystem? And I assume by ecosystem, Louise is meaning verifiable credentials and I guess identity verification. A lot's been said about this, but either one of you want to jump in about how we can combat deepfakes.
Go for it, Pedro.
So this one is really, I'm really keen on this one. This is a big thing we're doing now. Just like credentials, you need to check it's the right person. I think there's two big cases you also need to check. If it's someone trying to pretend to be you, first of all. So that can be either through presenting a picture or a video of you or a mask that looks like you, whatever it is. This is a very well-known and studied case of presentation attack detection. There's technology specific for that, which is evolving rapidly. It's already in a place where it's operationally usable, but it still has a lot to evolve. But this can prevent kind of presentations that are done to the camera. The other one is when you can inject stuff. So, for example, you're seeing a video of me now. You're not sure if it's my camera that's doing this or if it's being injected by some software that's using this video. So for you can tell it's live because I'm here. It's not a mask, but it could be an injected video. So when you're trying to open a bank account or use your credentials, but you have the ability to inject a video of someone, then it's not a presentation attack. You will not be able to detect it, but there's injection. So this is the other mechanism, which is preventing the injection. Deepfakes, now answering the question, have two parts. One of them is, am I trying to pretend to be someone or trying to create a synthetic identity? And probably the injection detection is enough to do that, because I cannot present a deepfake here, you would notice from liveness, and I cannot inject the deepfake. So it really doesn't matter if it's a deepfake. If I'm not able to present with an attack, presentation attack, or to inject stuff, I would already be preventing deepfakes. This is the major, I think, immediate way to prevent deepfakes. But the second one on deepfakes is I can just create a new identity and come up with names or credentials. If there's a way to create a credential for a fictitious person and it looks like a real person, then this could be used to create something, commit a crime. There's no culprit. There's no one did anything wrong. That person, at least on the camera, did not do anything wrong. So I think this is a major thing that needs to be checked. But the injection at the moment is enough. Where it's not enough, it's on pretending, like social networks, for example. People post videos of people and they, a video of Trump doing something or a video of Obama doing something. This is not injection detection, doesn't solve it. It has to be actually detecting it's a deepfake. And there's already quite good technology to detect those. Those are efficient and those are usable and are useful, but I don't think those are an immediate need for solving the identity problem. You can prevent those from liveness and injection. And sorry for the long answer here. It's complex.
No, it's definitely an interesting topic, and one that actually is quite nuanced. I agree with you about the difference between, let's say, preventing the use of synthetic identity and then preventing the use of, let's say, deepfake models to maybe simulate active actions and things like that people might have to prevent replay attacks of real identities. I suppose the way we would look at it in Dayon is we see it as sort of, the Swiss cheese layered model that you hear a lot about in aircraft control systems for preventing accidents. And it's the idea that no layer of protection is completely safe. There's going to be a hole in it somewhere. The idea is you stack enough layers in front of each other. And by that, you provide a system that provides enough fail safes to get through. And that's the way I see the deepfake problem being solved as well. Like Pedro's on the money, like the injection attack prevention is definitely you're going to the source of the input. You're trying to prevent that images being injected there, whether that be through digital means or whether that be through presentation attacks with screens to the camera. Then you're adding in also deepfake detection as well. So like you said, being able to, those models that you mentioned around being able to look at videos and photos and so on and classify them as deepfakes. And again, none of them is going to be perfect, but when you add those layers together, combine them with device intelligence and threat intelligence, you're then getting to a solution that's getting you an ability to detect and reject deepfake-based attacks.
Very good. Thank you both. Question, maybe the last one, I'm not sure. Shridhar, I hope I pronounced your name correctly there, probably not, but you're asking the question about how decentralized ID will be compatible with existing applications to migrate, so I guess existing applications, and how about the scaling cost. So I think maybe Shridhar's looking at how can these new ID systems, verifiable credentials, be compatible with existing applications. Which is they're probably not going to be, but I don't know if you guys have strong feelings about that. You want to try and pick that question up?
So this question is how are we going to migrate and get people from where we are today to where we're going to be tomorrow? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really about how will it be compatible, and I think that exactly. I think the answer is kind of leading you to the fact that it's not going to be straight away. So I guess how are we moving to this kind of new world of decentralized identity away from the old world that we have today?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I suppose that we've been working on quite a bit in here and Dayon at the moment is we have a platform called TrustX that is a way to orchestrate identity journeys, and it really is going to be in some cases, a spaghetti nightmare, but with the right solution in place, I think we can actually help simplify it. You're going to have people who are from countries where maybe they have no option but to use old school physical ID cards as a presentation. If you're an international business, you're going to be dealing with some of those countries. You're going to be dealing with countries that have national specific EID schemes. You're going to be dealing with countries who have seen the light and got to wallets with verifiable credentials and maybe biometric-bound credentials, and you're going to have a system that allows you to be able to know and present the user with the right options for their use case and be able to handle that and be able to then present a digital identity at the back end of it that can be used with that RP. So I think there's going to be a phase of transition. And I think even in the end state, the world is never going to decide on one technology for everything. That's the nature of humanity. When you're dealing with business globally, there is going to be a multiplicity of systems that you're going to have to deal with in IDV. So I don't think it's going to be a solvable problem where we're going to have one system that's compatible with everything all over the world. It is going to be part of the challenge of companies and identity to get platforms that can help solve that problem for our customers.
Very good. Yeah, sounds like a really interesting platform, Paul, and I can imagine that's giving some of your engineers some sleepless nights. But definitely interesting. I think we're kind of getting to the top of the hour, and we're out of time. Paul Kenny.
I might just pick up on one thing, Nick, before you do.
Of course, please go ahead. I
saw Jamie making a few comments there, and one of them was we should have a driver's license. Why not a social media license? I was wondering, do I need to do a test for that? And if so, what is it?
It's probably your use of acronyms or something like that, or how many times you say lol and you probably get in. So that could be excellent. Thanks for that question, Jamie. Sorry we missed that one. If there's maybe some that we'll try and get to, there's probably a couple we didn't quite get to, so maybe we'll try and pick those up somewhere. But thank you very much for everyone who put questions in. Of course, thank you very much to Paul and Pedro for taking part. I hope you guys found this fantastic, and I hope the audience kind of watching found it helpful, talking obviously about how ID companies are thinking about adopting verifiable and biometric bound credentials. That's it for this episode. Guys, thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you both again soon.
Bye everyone.
Thanks for the opportunity, Nick.
You're
thanks
very
to you
welcome.
and Doc for that. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.